Hello and welcome to Wine Wednesday, our 8th installment of Wine Wednesday with KB Estate Winery. I'm winemaker Freddie Arredondo, and behind the camera is Carrie Arredondo, our marketing events manager. So what's our question this week, Carrie?
Our question this week comes from Dr. David Kaminsky based on the ending of our last week's session. He asked in the comment section, is there a thing as too big a pour in regards to the air mixing with the wine? Will the wine not get enough air and taste different if I pour too big of a glass?
That's a great question, actually, and the answer is yes. With wine, you don't want to pour too big of a pour. So I'm going to show you a perfect size pour, in my opinion, when you're pouring a full glass of wine. Now, when you pour a full glass of wine, it should be about 4 or 5 ounces. That's really what a full glass should be. And this right here is probably about a 4.5 to 5 ounce pour. I don't even think it's 5 ounces there. And the reason for that is because you want to be able to swirl the glass and make sure that it has enough headspace in the glass to really capture the aromatics of the wine. If you fill your glass all the way to the top, you don't give it enough space to actually capture the aroma of the wine. So as far as aerating it, that really doesn't take effect by having too big of a pour. But what does happen is that you don't have enough of a headspace to really enjoy the aromatics in the wine. So yes, there is such thing as too big of a pour. And to be quite frank, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I ask for a glass of wine and the wine is poured all the way to the very top. In my opinion, just get a bigger glass and pour a smaller pour instead of a small glass with a big pour.
That's perfect. Thank you, Freddie, for answering that question. So Freddie, I do have a question myself.
Okay.
I know that you filtered our barrel fermented Chardonnay on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably a lot of people coming into the tasting room, I know it is definitely a question. So I'd imagine out here on social media, people would have the same question. And really that is like, do you filter all of your wines? Let's start there. Do you filter all your wines?
That's a really good question because kind of a complicated answer. And the answer is yes and no. I almost always filter all of our wines at least a little bit. There are some instances where I have not filtered red wines. Whites we always filter white wines, and we filter them to sterile, so it's 0.45 microns, which is a very, very small pore size, and that's basically to filter out all of the microbes. So with our wines, we do filter all of them to a degree. Our reds, we do what's called a polish filtration, which is just a kind of a larger pore size filtration. It's just a coarse filtration, just so that we get rid of the sediment or any possible sediment that would be in the glass, in the wine.
Well, I think you kind of answered my second question, which was, what is the purpose of filtering wine? But I think
so I'll expand on it a little bit,
okay.
Because the purpose of filtering wine is twofold. One, you do want to get rid of sediment. As wine ages, wine starts out very, very cloudy. It's murky. You can't see through it. So as the wine ages, it does settle out insoluble solids and proteins and all kinds of other stuff, yeast cells. But the settling and the aging process doesn't get rid of all of that stuff. In white wines, you want to filter to sterile filtration if it hasn't gone through a process called malolactic fermentation, which is another process that takes place in wines to quote unquote stabilize the wine. And a lot of white wines don't go through that process. So we want to make sure we sterile filter them so that we filter out any potential microbes that would stop it from causing a spontaneous malolactic fermentation in the bottle, which would just completely ruin the wine.
That's great. That's very interesting. I have one last question.
Okay.
Is there a reason that a winery would not filter their wine?
Sure. Yeah. Lots of wineries don't filter their wine, and I don't see it as much of a thing anymore as I used to, where on the wine label it says unfiltered, unfined. It used to be kind of like a badge of honor. I don't know if I see that as much as I used to, 5-10 years ago. And with red wines, you can pretty safely, if the wine is sound, if you use really good winemaking practices, you're sterile in all of your processes, and you're really good about being just clean in your winemaking. For the most part, you can get away with not filtering red wines. The school of thought, oftentimes, especially older school, and sometimes even newer, the thought is that filtration tends to strip flavors. Personally, I don't think that. I think that filtration sometimes actually sharpens some of the flavors and actually helps to accentuate fruit when done properly. Now, there are some times where you can take it too far and you can strip some character from wine. So that's where the science part of winemaking really comes in handy, to really know what you're doing in the filtration so that you improve the wine, not make it worse.
Thank you, Freddie. There's a lot to learn under filtration. If anyone has any other questions about that, please shoot a comment down below and we'll touch base on the beginning of next week's session.
All right. Thank you all. See you next week.